Welcome. My name's Daniel Pryfogle, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Sympara. We are a multi-faith community with a public mission to repurpose religious assets for the common good. And I'm so glad that all of you have set aside the time for this conversation today. This is a series that we inaugurated this spring called Conversations on Sacred Civic Placemaking. And we're talking with religious leaders, clergy, lay leaders, architects, poets, designers, community organizers, all to try to get a sense of what this idea of sacred civic placemaking means and what it can mean for our communities as we seek to create more just, equitable, and sustainable communities. My guest today is Kat Turner, and I'm so delighted to have the opportunity to talk with her again. Kat and I met last summer as I was scouting around for some good news about congregations that had repurposed their facilities for the common good. And I was so excited, so inspired to learn about the experience of Church of the Resurrection, an Episcopal parish in Alexandria, Virginia, and then to meet Kat and to hear the backstory of how they came to this point to develop their property for the creation of affordable housing for their neighbors there in Alexandria. We're going to Kat and I are going to have a conversation for a little while here for 25 minutes or so. And in this kind of fishbowl experience, invite you as the audience to listen in. And then at a certain point, I'm going to ask you to join the conversation by posing your questions in the chat function on Zoom. And then we'll field those questions and have a dialogue before we close at the top of the hour. Kat, you shared a couple of other biographical details that were new to me. What I already knew about you is that you've been at this church for a long time, since the 1980s. You've served as the senior warden on 3 occasions. I just learned that you were a member of the building committee, and that building committee has been discharged of its duty in just the last 2 weeks because of the project that you're going to tell us about. So congratulations on fulfilling that committee's charge. You've been in the greater Washington, D.C. area for some time. You moved there from the west side of Philadelphia to DC to go to college at Georgetown. Bill Clinton was one of your classmates, and one of your early jobs was working on the war on poverty in the late 60s. You retired after 30 plus years as chief of staff for the Association of American Medical Colleges, a membership organization representing U.S. and Canadian medical schools and teaching hospitals. Certainly stayed busy in your retirement, devoting a lot of time to Church of the Resurrection, as we will hear. So thank you so much, Kat, for being willing to engage in this conversation. Again, I've enlisted Kat over the last year to tell this story to individual congregations that Sympara is working with. I'm so glad now that we get this opportunity to share your story with others. Kat, I want to start by asking you for just a brief summary of what your church has done, and then we'll dig in deeper. In late May, a virtual grand opening was held for the Spire, a multifamily community of 113 affordable apartments built on 2 acres once occupied by the church. What happened to the church?
We tore it down. We only had 2 acres, And when we decided we wanted to do something with affordable housing, of course, our church was right smack in the middle of the 2 acres. There was no way to build a financially feasible housing project around the edges. So we early on had to come to the decision that we would tear the church down. If you're familiar with the Episcopal Church, individual congregations hold their property in trust for the diocese. So we couldn't make independent decisions. We had to consult with our bishop, and the diocese said we could not sell the property. And we had to have sacred space on the property by the end of whatever it is we did. So we parceled the 2 acres into two pieces. One for the affordable housing, which we did not sell the land. We did a ground lease for 65 years for the apartment building. And the other smaller parcel, we built a smaller 5,000 square foot church. That is now our new home, coming down from a church that had been about 12,000 square feet total before.
So when I relate your story to others, I often say that you kind of right-sized the sanctuary for a smaller yet bolder congregation. Is that a fitting description?
Yeah, there for a minute I thought you said older, which is also a fitting description. But yes, we went from a nave that sat between 300 and 400 people to a nave that sits about 100 people.
Okay. This was a long journey for the congregation. Multiple years, lots of conversation, lots of anxiety, as I've learned from you, and lots of prayer about the future of the church. Tell us a little bit about that journey, and I'm particularly interested in what was the turning point, from kind of uncertainty to the clarity around this vision.
Yeah. You know, when the project started, I called it the David and Goliath project. But as I was thinking on it more recently, I now call it the Cat of 9 Lives project. There was not one turning point. There were like 9 turning points in this project. But the first one came with the decision. The church was about 50 years old. We'd had 2 rectors in its life. The second rector was announced her retirement, and we proceeded with the process that the Episcopal Church has before you call a new priest. You develop a parish profile, and as we went down this route, we were finding out some things about ourselves. We had a 50-year-old building with deferred maintenance, substantial deferred maintenance. We had a declining attendance. 80% of the people who answered the parish profile questionnaire were 55 or above. 25% of our church's income was coming from renting the facility to other congregations. And still to face the budget crunch, we had taken all outreach funding out of our budget. And so we were dwindling as a church. I always said we were dying. Some of my colleagues questioned my use of the word dying, but it's clear we were dwindling. And I guess the first turning point was when we said, you know, in writing this description of a new priest that we want to call, we're looking to this priest to solve all of our problems. We don't know what we want to be. We just know we don't want to be the way we are. Let's get the priest in and fix it. And we decided that that was unlikely to happen. What was it about us that was going to attract a priest if we couldn't even say who we were? So we decided we had to have a discernment project to see what it is the future is. We had to take charge of our future. We couldn't rely on somebody coming in from the outside and doing it for us. So that was the major turning point, to put our search on hold and to start what turned out to be a 1-year discernment project. During the discernment process, we generated something like 20 different scenarios. all the way from closing the doors and saying our mission was done to originally we thought we might sell the property before the bishop told us we couldn't, but we could maybe rent it and take that money and combine with another small congregation that was having the same kind of problems, all the way to the most radical scenario, which was to tear the church down and build affordable housing. We had these 20 scenarios. We spent probably 6 different congregational forums over the course of the year, where we put each scenario up. What are the pros? What are the cons? If we were going to combine with somebody else, what church it might be. We sent people out to visit those churches. We just invested a lot of time. And finally, the committee's recommendation was for this most radical approach. And we put that to a vote in December of 2013. 96% of our congregation voted for this. And that's astounding. I mean, I always say we can't get 96% to agree on what hymn we want to sing the next Sunday.
And they voted for the most radical, and they voted for the most radical option.
That we did. And we had called this a revisioning process. And I remember somebody at that congregational forum when we voted saying, this is not revisioning, this is transformational, and that's who we want to be. So that was our second turning point where we embraced this decision. Now, remember, I said this was December 2013. That's a long way from where we are now. Our third turning point was choosing the developer. We interviewed 11 different firms, including for-profit and not-for-profit, before we found a not-for-profit developer that we thought really got us. And we chose a developer that had a very robust resident services program, so we could see some synergy in the future between what they wanted to do with the population in their building and what we might want to do as neighbors to this population. The fourth turning point came as we started to work on the financial pro formas. And every way we worked them, we could not get as much money for the church from that ground lease as we had hoped. You probably know that affordable housing doesn't throw off very much money. And Resurrection had decided we wanted to do this without spending any of our own money, since we didn't have any. So the financial model that we came up with was to take the ground lease for 65 years and take all of the money up front from the ground lease and use that as the construction money for the new church. And so taking the money up front instead of over 65 years put an additional stress on the affordable housing part of it. And so what we thought we were going to get went down to a lesser amount of money. And we had to figure out, could we still build the church for that lesser amount of money? And then the developer came and said, well, we could go back to that higher amount of money if we built fewer affordable housing apartments and build a strip of market rate townhouses along the edge of the property, which would generate more money. So the turning point for the congregation there was, it wasn't about the money to build as big a church or as glamorous a church. It was about what we wanted to do in the mission area, and that was affordable housing. We were willing to tear our church down for affordable housing. We weren't willing to tear it down for market rate housing. And we had said that.
Let me just pause right there, Kat, just to make sure that I'm following the story and that others on the listening in are as well. You you needed to earn some revenue from this project in order to build a new sanctuary, a smaller sanctuary, but nonetheless you needed funding for that. And
yes, we had we had committed at the beginning that we would make no assessment on parishioners for this project.
Okay, okay. So that's one question. The second is, you know, one might assume that the developer in the financing that it assembled for the affordable housing community could just go ahead and build you a church as well. Why was that not possible?
They build affordable housing.
Yep.
They were willing to be our development partner for ours, and they indeed financed it by giving us the ground lease money up front in one pot. But that wasn't what they did. That was not congruent with their own mission statement.
Okay. And the funding, as I understand it, for the affordable housing was low-income housing tax credits, and
I'll get to that in a minute about, because they were other turning points for us.
Okay, but here, just on this point, that money couldn't that money couldn't be used to build a sanctuary for the church. It had to go through the lease arrangement in order for you to use that money to build the new sanctuary.
And not just the low-income housing tax money, but some of the other funding sources had the same similar kind of restrictions.
Okay.
So when we went back to the congregation about, you know, it's going to be an even smaller church than we originally thought, they confirmed that we wanted to stick with at least 100 units of affordable housing, no market rate housing, and we would just make do with less money. And that vote was 83% of the congregation. So there were a couple of places where we had to go back for congregational approval, and that 83% was the lowest point we ever got. But that reaffirmation of the mission was another turning point. The next turning point was getting the bishop and the diocese to approve the project. We had consulted with them from the beginning, and I said they put some restrictions on us. We couldn't sell the property, we could only lease it, we had to have sacred space on it. So we did finally get the ecclesiastical approval. And we got the city council approval in the city of Alexandria. And with that came some of the financing for the affordable housing building, not for the church, but for the affordable housing building. And it's really interesting because the city has a commitment to affordable housing, but they don't have a big budget for it. And it actually came down to, they were not going to do any affordable housing that year because their budget didn't have it. And the city council voted to increase the property tax rate in order to get funding for affordable housing, not necessarily for our project, but to keep affordable housing in the city's mission and budget. Mm-hmm. So the city approval was another big turning point. Then the low-income housing tax credits, which is a statewide competition that we were sort of the last approved one in terms of the points we had for that. And with respect to that, one of the things we considered along the way is whether the church had to be in a separate building or whether it could be the first floor of a bigger building.
Right.
And decided not to, because we wanted the visibility of the separate building, but also it just would make a much more complicated legal structure to condominiumize a single building, to pull out the part that was for the church as opposed to the part that the federal and the state and the local tax monies were going for. So we so that went by.
You have a neighbor church, Presbyterian church nearby in Arlington that ended up doing the kind of condominium approach. You I'm sure know about Arlington Presbyterian Church and the
I do. And There's also Clarendon Baptist Church in
Right,
Arlington,
right.
where they built their housing above their existing sanctuary. So they basically sold their air rights rather than their dirt.
Interesting. Yes,
So
yes.
so there are a number of approaches that can be taken. The eighth turning point was after we decided we had to tear our building down, was to decide where we were going to be for the 2.5 years that they were building a new church. And we are fortunately 2 miles from Virginia Theological Seminary, and they gave us administrative and worship space for that 2.5 years without charging us a penny. And there were other nearby Episcopal churches that allowed us to use their parish hall and their sanctuaries on occasions for special worship services, for fellowship opportunities, so that we could maintain our identity as a congregation. And we started that in October of 2019, just before the pandemic came and changed everything for everybody anyway. So that was a turning point, finding a place that wasn't going to cost us. And then our final turning point was the grand opening, where the new church was consecrated on Holy Saturday of 2021. We are Church of the Resurrection, and we always said we would be back in our church by Easter 2021, and we made it with 6 hours to spare.
6 hours to spare. Wow, that's fantastic. That's a lot of turning. That's a lot of turning points, Kat.
It is.
Yeah.
That's why I said it's the sort of the cat with 9 lives project.
Yes, yes. It makes me think that we can tell a kind of narrative about projects like this, that there was one big moment and then things went in a different direction. But the reality is, it's a lot of decisions along the way, a lot of critical junctures, as you've described. Makes me think of the song "Simple Gifts." To turn will be our delight, till by turning we come round right. Lots of turning points.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of spiritual turning for us as individual congregants too. I mean,
Yeah.
any one of those points could have killed the project.
Yes.
And I can remember saying on more than one occasion to our rector, if God wants us to do this, why is he making it so hard? It just doesn't make sense. And she taught me a different mantra, which was, if God really wants us to do it, he will give us everything we need to do it. And that proved itself over and over again during the course of the project. So I have to tell you that this turned out to be a real journey of faith for me personally, and for a number of people in the congregation who, we would face the part, a decision point. And is this something we were being called to do, or am I just being stubborn because I said I was going to do this? And, really thinking it through individually and as a congregation.
Yeah.
And all of that spiritual work together helped to strengthen us at a time when we didn't have a physical place. And in fact, not a physical place of our own, but not even a physical place for more than a year, where we were just meeting on Zoom and Facebook Live. So
yeah, right. Wow. Well, that's a powerful description of discernment, both individual and corporate discernment. I want to ask you, I was reading a recent sermon by your rector, Joe Belzer. This was just from a couple of weeks ago, and she spoke of the church as being God's change agents in your neighborhood and beyond, but agents who give credit to God for that transformation. And she said that your task as the people of God is simply to tell the story of what God is doing in the world. And she closed by saying something remarkable. I was just so struck when I got to the end of the sermon. She said, "We have nothing to lose and the ones we tell have everything to gain. And I thought to myself, my gosh, what liberation to say we have nothing to lose. And I suspect she got more than a few amens, even that, that quiet Episcopalian type of amen, maybe. How does a
We smile very loudly.
Okay, all right. How does a congregation come to understand such liberation or such freedom as good news? You've got nothing to lose.
I think by living through it. But I will say that our rector, who got called in the middle of this process, well, not in the middle, but after we had made the decision as a congregation, but before we had actually gotten the money or the permissions and everything, our rector geared not every sermon every Sunday, but many of her sermons, she found a way to connect the scriptural lessons to what we were going through, so that we did begin to see this as not just a decision we made, but as a real God journey that we were making together. And I think that I can't underestimate the formation, the spiritual formation that occurred from Joe's sermons that led us to believe this about ourselves. And that's not to say that we didn't have some disappointments and that we didn't lose people. We could, because we did. There were people who had been members of our congregation and who voted to proceed with this. But once we were not in the church where their children had been baptized and married, and they had moved away from, and they were driving 25 miles to come back to this building every Sunday. Well, if they weren't coming back to the building, why drive the 25 miles? Episcopal churches are thick on the ground in Northern Virginia, and there were ones closer. So we did lose some people, but we have had some people join us because they've heard our story. So
beyond the, you mentioned that her preaching and I would take, the worship itself was formative for the church during this time. What were some other practices, alongside the town halls and the group meetings to talk about the project? What were some other practices that were essential to help inform people so that this liberation that your rector speaks of could be received as good news?
One thing was, we have a monthly parish newsletter, and there was always a page of progress report about the project. So everybody knew what was happening, when some material got delayed or when some subcontractor didn't show, everybody could feel some ownership of this. We had several occasions where we had to appear before the city council or the planning commission, and we took 20 or 25 people from our parish with us wearing buttons, letting them know that this was a united parish of voters in their community. We always had a resurrection prayer as part of our service that changed every couple of months depending on where we were in the process. And we found a hymn that we sort of adopted and sang a lot. I don't remember what its official name is, but it begins, "We will build a house." And so we sang that frequently at our services and
Wow.
At our business meetings and things like that, reminding that we'll build a house where love will live, where people will have joy and laughter and new life. So we had all of those.
Yeah. I imagine you had, in addition to that, some practices where you met your neighbors. To have such concern for your neighbors when you were reviewing those 20 plus options, and you landed, as you said, on the most radical option, which was to sacrifice your property for the good of your neighbors. I'm just assuming that decision came out of some encounters with your neighbors. Is that true?
It No, not really. What it came out of was a housing report that showed that the city of Alexandria had lost 90% of its affordable housing in the last decade. And so we saw that the need was great. And the corner where our church was located had, on three of the corners, had retirement communities. And we knew that a lot of people in those retirement communities, the maintenance, the food service people, the medical technicians, were driving 40 and 50 miles to get to work. So we thought we wanted to build. We didn't want to build senior affordable housing. We made a definite decision. We wanted housing for working families. So something like 85% of our units are 2 or 3 bedroom units. So, but we hoped that some of the workers in these retirement communities would be the people who came to live in it. And in fact, one of the first residents is a maintenance worker at the retirement community right next door to us. So
wow, that's
so
great.
we knew about a community need rather than individual people. So
okay. We're gonna switch course here now and ask for the folks who are part of this Zoom call to ask their questions by posing those in the chat. And as folks give some thought to the questions that they want to ask you, Kat, I've got one more for you. The church on its website describes itself as an outward focused outpost for Christ Jesus, an outward focused outpost for Christ Jesus. And so I'm wondering what possibilities for mission, for sacred civic placemaking do you see as you occupy that outpost and as you look outward? What's next for the church?
Well, on September 12th, I am leading the first of our new discernment discussions at church. It's going to be months or weeks, not months, because after all, we don't have a big asset anymore like our property to repurpose. But we feel we do still have energy and excitement and ideas. So we're going to be exploring and sort of settling on a mission area. And some of the things that are kind of be up for grabs for discussion is that during the course of this, we started a food pantry because we had space in our church that had previously been a preschool that got relocated before we shut it down. So we started a food pantry there, which we found another place for, and we were up and running before the pandemic came, which turned out to be a really good thing because our clientele went up by 3 times during the pandemic. So there's people who are concerned about food insufficiency. There are people who want us to do something in the racial equity, social justice arena. There are people who want us to reach out to our new neighbors who are right next door to us now and do something with them. There is a half a mile away, there's a community college of young people. In fact, the community college at which Mrs. Biden teaches is there. And we know that it's a congregation or a student body of a very diverse student body, both in age and ethnicity. And maybe there's something that we could or should be doing with them. So I don't know for sure what's going to go, where we're going to go, but we're going to figure that out in a series of 4 discernment conversations in September, October, and November, with the understanding that whatever we pick as our focus doesn't preclude other opportunities that the Holy Spirit might bring us, the way the food pantry came to us in the middle of the redevelopment project.
We've got a question from the Reverend Sung Ho Lee. what did the bishop or the diocese request in order for them to give permission to this project? How did you go about persuading them?
I gotta be honest that was a lot harder sell than we thought it was going to be.
Mhm, mhm.
We had to persuade them that this was a real discernment, not something that we had sort of grabbed onto as maybe an easy way out of the issues. We could not sell the property. We could only ground lease it.
Mhm.
So that limited the amount of funding that was going to flow to us. We had to have a new church on the grounds. We couldn't take the money from the ground lease and go to some other small church and say, here we are with our $4.1 million to combine with you. Think of all the mission work we can do with this $4.1 million. We had to build a church, and it had to be at least 5,000 square feet. So I'm pleased to welcome you to our new church of 5,005 square feet. And as I said, there were the bishop. The hardest thing for me to appreciate was that we had gone through this discernment project, and we thought it should be, readily apparent to the bishop that what it was we were doing and why we were doing it. And he should say, well, of course. But of course, he has his own discernment process that he has to go through and think about what the effect is going to be for the other 170 parishes in his diocese. And what was hard for me was recognizing that a discernment process and a business cycle didn't necessarily match.
They don't always line up. Yeah.
We thought we were going to be going for our request for low-income housing tax credits in 2016. We went in 2018. So
Wow.
some of that was working through the issues with the diocese. And then the diocese had to, there were something like 30 documents associated with the closing on this project. The diocese had to look at all of them, and their counselor had to approve or the chancellor had to approve all of them. Some of them we had to go back and renegotiate aspects with our development partners. So that was the involvement of the bishop.
Okay. Okay.
And his standing committee. It wasn't the bishop alone.
Okay. We've got a couple of questions about timeline, and you just referenced that that the discernment and the business cycle don't always line up, and that once you had completed your discernment, the diocese itself had to still do its kind of due diligence. Megan Foley has asked, how long did it take for the congregation to realize that this change had to be made? And were there factors that helped make it clear? Like, for instance, were you out of money?
We weren't out of money, but we were not living the kind of congregational life that we had in the past. In terms of, I mentioned that we had already stripped outreach money from the budget. So anytime we wanted to do something outreach, it was another pass the plate, contribute to this particular effort. I think what made the congregation come to this was when our rector retired, it was a chance to do something different without having to displace a clergy person. And we spent that year with all of these congregational forums. All right, somebody suggested we do this. All right, let's put this scenario up. What are the pros and the cons? And we would, do that. And we did it in small groups. We would add to it. I'd post that newsprint on the board, give people little red dots on your way out, vote for the ones that, strike you as being important to you. And so we kept massaging it so that by the time we said, it really looks like our options are to just sort of stumble on the way we are going, and we see this downward trend, or try something radically different. And if we fail, we've learned lessons that might contribute to other congregations. One of the things that we said to the bishop when we were proposing this is, and he asked us, well, what do you see the future of resurrection after this is done? And I told him that we couldn't guarantee that there would be a congregation and a church at the end of this project. But if there wasn't, what a legacy we would have left. We would have left this affordable housing building. We would have left this newly built church that he could use for some of the small ethnic congregations that are sharing space with other. We were willing to, if we couldn't survive, to leave this as our legacy.
What a provocative question the bishop asked. I wonder if he knew how provocative it was. What is the future of resurrection? That is.
And I'll tell you, we have a future now that I did not think was going to be possible.
Wow. Another question.
Based on where we were when we started.
Yeah, yes, indeed. Another question about timeline is asked by Nancy Taylor. She's wondering how long was the process that led up to the December 2013 vote? That was the vote at which you had narrowed down these 20 plus options.
It was a year long from where we stopped. Where we stopped our search for a new rector, and asked our interim rector to stay on an extra year while we worked this out for ourselves.
Okay. Sung Ho Lee has another question. Did anyone help you recruit a developer? How did you find the developer, which is called the AHC, correct?
Yeah. Well, we started by Googling. And then every time we interviewed, I think 11 developers. And every time we interviewed a developer, on the way out, we'd say, who do you regard as your competition? And then we'd make an appointment and go see that one. We learned a lot during this process. And the people who were sort of at the end of it were really benefited by the fact that we had accumulated a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge during the course of it.
Your question,
but we actually started with the Office of Housing in the city of Alexandria. They gave us our first leads to a couple of developers to talk to.
Okay, well, wonderful. Yeah, I was just sorry, I'm talking over you. I just said that it sounds like your questions got sharper in the process because you were getting connected with a variety of developers. Does AHC, the developer, does it also now manage the property?
They have a management arm. The developing company has a management arm, and it is their management arm that is managing the property. And that was one of the things we looked for in a developer, somebody who would be able to manage the property, because we didn't want people knocking on the priest's door because their toilets were plugged up.
Yes, right. So Megan Foley has asked a question along those lines. Is the church involved in any of the management or operations of the affordable housing community?
We're involved to the extent that there is a piece of the property that is considered shared. It's between the two buildings, and there's a little courtyard there. And so the expenses there are shared. There's an access road that serves both buildings. So we have shared maintenance agreements that are in effect. They're still leasing up. They're not fully leased yet, but when they are closer to fully leased, they're going to be doing a survey of the residents to identify what things the residents want. And at that point, the church hopes to be able to meet some of those needs. For example, we have a Girl Scout leader in our congregation who wants to start a Girl Scout troop in the apartment building for the young girls who are there. None of that is up and running yet, but we hope to be. There are also a couple of parking places on the access road that belong to the church, and some that belong to the apartment building, but the developer has posted that those parking places are for church use only on Sunday morning and giving us a few more parking spaces. So we've got that kind of informal agreement, but we don't have any say as a congregation in how the apartment is managed. We had our input in the design of it, and that's about it.
Okay. Ed Bowen says that he's a member of First United Methodist Church in Freehold, New Jersey. His congregation is aging and shrinking. And most of the folks there know that their situation is not sustainable. So in the near future, they're going to probably consider a process similar to the one that you went through. What happened? He wants to know what happened that made your congregation realize that it had to make a drastic change.
It was the retirement of our rector and trying to put together the call for a new rector.
Okay.
And what was it that we could offer someone who would be young and vital to come to our congregation if we couldn't even say what we wanted other than just let us continue the way we are till we die and don't have to make any changes.
Okay. Laura Sue Wilansky has asked a similar question just about the primary motivation of the church to do this. It sounds like it was, well, just what you just said. First, it was kind of getting clear about who you are so that when you go out to search for a new priest, you could say something particular about your identity, about your vision, about your mission. Am I hearing that right? That was the primary motivation, that clarity about identity and vision?
Yes, I think so. And I will say that in addition to myself, there were two other former senior wardens who had just retired. And the three of us sort of said, take us and use us. We're going to manage this process. And so it really helped to have several committed people working on it rather than just one person. But this is not the kind of thing that can come from the top down, either the rector or even your lay leaders. It has to come up from the congregation in order to really be successful. And you may have to bring them along with your whatever you do as your discernment process. But at the end, if you can't get, you might not get a 96% vote, but if you can't get a substantial vote in favor of it, it's just postponing the inevitable.
The story that you've told, Kat, suggests that there might be something in the DNA of this church that leads to what Megan has noted as your courageous and bold leadership. You've been there for several decades, starting in the 1980s. Were there other decisions that the church made in your time there that point to this kind of capacity for courage and boldness?
Yeah, I would say that this is a church that had community-focused outreach in its DNA from the beginning. Before I was there, they were instrumental in setting up 2 different homeless shelters in 2 jurisdictions, and in starting an organization that was called Carpenter's Lodging at the time, but which is now called Community Lodging, which is a low, an affordable housing project. They build or they buy small apartment buildings. So we had this DNA. We had for 40 years, we had a preschool in our church that was a model for diversity and inclusion. 40 to 50% of the children every year were had a different learning style or some other what some people would call a disability. We had children who were blind, who were autistic, who had Down syndrome. So the church has always tried to sort of see what community needs are, and that had fallen away. Gradually, over the years as the congregation shrunk and the budget shrunk. And I think there were still enough of us old timers left there who hungered for a church that was connected to the community in meaningful ways. And so that desire, awakening that desire, was also part of this project.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the project was not really foreign to the people. The process was not calling them to be something they were not, but was evoking their history, their deepest desires.
Yes. Yes.
Wow. Wow. Is the congregation growing now? Ed Bowen has asked that question in the chat. Our residents of the housing project attending.
A couple of answers to that. It's a little hard to say because right now we are still under pandemic restrictions.
Mm-hmm.
Alexandria keeps going between the green and the yellow area. So we are not allowed to open our church to capacity yet. So no, we don't have more people. We have about this, we're doing 3 Sunday services. We're still having about the same number of people that we had before, spread over 3 services now. However, we're online and some of our services are viewed more than 100 times during the course of the week. So we've grown that way with a whole new population that may never come to the church, but who surprisingly send us money sometimes.
Wow.
And the one thing that we were told from the very beginning is don't look to the housing project to supply butts in the seats on Sunday mornings. That's not why you're doing it. And we've said that all along. But I got to tell you, last Sunday, there was a family from the housing who was in our pews. So
wow.
So it may happen.
Yeah, that's good. I know there's
but I think it's not going to happen because the church is there and because we build the apartment building. It's going to happen if we establish relationships with them and let them know that they're truly welcome and that we really want to be neighbors to them. So
there are of course other ways to measure growth, and I'm thinking one is just the energy of the community, of the spiritual community. And I wonder now, as you step into that new sanctuary, as you talk with your fellow members, what are you noticing about their energy?
Well, first of all, our building is light where the other one was dark. And so everybody's happy to be in this very light-filled place.
Yeah.
Everybody's happy to be back together and seeing each other again. That's as much a function of the pandemic as it was about, being away and being someplace else. And we're still feeling really good about what we did. We can look out the window and we see this big 113 unit apartment building next to us. So part of the energy is just sort of post-pandemic, and part of it is sort of a sense of fulfillment about after 8 years, we actually did what we said we were going to do.
Wow. That is so, I know that's got to be just so satisfying, gratifying. What a blessing. Kat, it's a blessing for me, and I'm sure for the others who've been on this call to listen to your story. I know that on the church's website, there's more background videos. There's been some press about the about the church.
And I've actually put a couple of pictures on my desktop. If you would like to see the church, I can show you.
Yeah, why don't you just show it? Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes still. Show us a picture or two.
Let's see. I need to find out how to get to my. Takes a while for them to come up.
Oh, here it comes. Oh
Okay, here's the
my
church
goodness.
and here's the apartment building.
Wow, Kat,
This is from the back side of it.
I have not seen an aerial picture like this. I've seen all of the kind of the street level. This is amazing.
Mhm. Okay, and here is from the street. This is the church that's coming up. You'll see here that the landscaping is not done yet. It's 100 degrees in Washington. They're going to probably not do the landscaping until the fall. But this
Yep.
is our church. This is the nave where those windows are. And the apartment building is over here. This big looming thing behind us is one of the retirement communities that we're
Okay.
next to. Here is our nave. As you see, we didn't go for pews. We went for movable chairs so that we can be flexible. And this is not filled. It's filled to the capacity we're allowed to have right now in the pandemic. And the final picture I'll show you is the view from the altar. Because we have a much smaller nave, what we did is, this is the nave and back here is the parish hall. Both of these rooms have sliding glass doors so that they can be opened up, and for bigger functions or for social events or for a catered Advent dinner, we can use the whole space. So it's a much more flexible space than we had before.
Wow. Wow. Kat,
so that's our church.
How exciting. Thank you so much for sharing those images. Fantastic. I want to thank you again for your time today and for sharing the story with us. I hope to get up to DC later this year, so I'll touch base with you because I'd love to take a tour of both the church and the affordable housing community. Thank you to everyone for being part of this conversation today. Our conversation series continues later this month on July 27th. I'll be in conversation with Melissa St. Clair, who is the senior minister of Heart of the Rockies Christian Church in Fort Collins, Colorado. And they're pursuing a collaborative development on their property with 3 nonprofit organizations. A kind of intergenerational village will be rising in the near future on that property. So I encourage you all to check out our upcoming conversations. Just go to our website at sympara.org and click on, in the navigation, click on projects, and then conversations on sacred civic placemaking. Thank you to Kat again, and thank you to all for being part of this important conversation about sacred civic placemaking. And wherever you are and whatever you're discerning with your community, I wish you blessings on your good work. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.